idea of the ideology of atheists being the province of Malita Christian people. And we look at the atheists. They will be, they have the different values and the beliefs that we cannot match with them. So being a representative of the people say we should not be having these people in our province because they share a different value at all. They are not Christian people. That's one of the reasons for the Awi communique. And the second one is that we are trying to do away with Chinese companies, the CCP companies' involvement in the province. Looking at this destructive development so far, the market is for China, and the logging industry is destructive all the way back in the 40 years back from today. So we haven't seen anything good. They left destroyed environments, so many bad things in the province. So the people are not happy. So we set up this moratorium, and we've seen the effect of it, that we see local people coming up doing retailing because of the space that has been left for them in the province. Mm-hmm. So they can come up with the businesses, even to the stage of them running shipping companies. So that, in my view, I see that standing for our people will make them, become strong in their own place.
And would you say this is why you opposed the government's decision to switch recognition from Taiwan to the PRC? Could you explain a little more about your thinking? And I'm sure that you faced a lot of opposition, and you have faced consequences for taking a stand on this question. Can you maybe talk to us a little bit more about how that decision played out?
Like the switch from ROC, the Taiwan government, and to the PRC, we've seen that as an act that should not be happening with the government, because we expect them to come with some sort of referendum to get the people know about the whole thing, because we view it as something that will come and be part of our life in the future. So people need to be aware of the way the CCP is dealing with the development in a country. So that is not the case. They make the switch without the people know that this is going to happen. And we expect that during the national general campaign, the government should have, the candidate should have, come with knowing that, getting to people to know that we after this government come into power, we'll have a switch, so that people can know exactly what, and they will be prepared to do other things in terms of when the switch happen. Mm-hmm. Because we think that the idea that we're going to pay for during the election through our ballot papers, we need to know, and we must agree before giving them the mandate in power. But the issue of switch has not been the case. So my people didn't agree with the switch. Mm-hmm. So they said that the Malita provincial government will remain as a government under the national government, but will not accept anything from the CCP at the moment, because we are not prepared. We don't have the safeguards to safeguard our people in terms of, with the CCP government coming to the province.
And so you don't believe that the government consulted with the people or gained the mandate or legitimacy to make such a switch. They essentially made the switch on their own and then tried to force it down on the rest of the provinces. And you've been resisting that. Can you tell me a bit about your current status? You were ousted in a no-confidence vote, but I understand you're challenging that decision through legal means. Are you hoping to be able to return to your assembly seat with the lawsuit?
Definitely. Just strongly believe, because of the act of disqualifying me or cancelling my seat in the Provincial Government Act that I have known of. There is nothing that involves a minister of the central government in his power to give the disqualification letter to me, because I was voted by the people and I was mandated by my people, and it would be right for me to go out from that seat by my people, not the minister of the national government. So in that view, I'm hoping to get my seat back after the court case that have been filed for the High Court to see and give decision on the matter.
Mm-hmm. And have you noticed since the security agreement and the new government came to power that more members of the assembly are suddenly adopting very pro-China positions? Has China's influence been impacting the decisions being made at the National Assembly level?
Yes, they do, because when we were in the executive government, they paid 6 members of my executive government to resign from my government when I was in Brisbane, and that was the truth about they've been involved in the provincial matters. So they give money to the members of the assembly to resign from my government. But I'm so lucky that I can replace the 6 at the same time with the opposition group that believe in what I stand for. So I believe there's this influence that the CCP through the national government has been doing to disturb my government.
So the PRC, it seems, paid money to provincial assembly members to resign in order to hurt you, and you were able to counteract that move at least.
At the moment, the influence of the PRC normally comes with the cronies of the national government. Yeah, so you cannot really figure out, but we can see that this money comes from CCP because of they are going for the CCP's interest. So that, in my mind, I just understand that all this influence comes from the CCP through the DCGA.
Now, at the same time that you banned CCP money and projects in Malaita, you did say you opened the doors to a greater American presence, American aid, American development projects. How is that received by your constituents? Are they generally more open to the United States and wishing greater interaction with the U.S.?
The people in the constituency in Mali, the province as a whole, they are very happy about the U.S. aid scale, which is now in the province of Malaita. And if not, it's the first time a bigger country like the U.S. comes straight to the province through a platform under the NGOs of the United States of America called Windrock. And people are very happy because they meaningfully engage properly with the resources through the funding, 25 million US that has been funded to the Malaita provincial people.
But it does seem to me, just from hearing your story, and the more I learn about it, the more it strikes me that diplomatically the U.S. has not been very present and very active in some of these shenanigans that have been taking place over the past few years. Do you wish to see more U.S. engagement with the Solomon Islands? And as this sort of political turmoil is playing out, how can the U.S. government be helpful in either stabilizing the situation or promoting democratic values and principles, or ensuring that undemocratic practices are not taking hold at the CCP's behest?
I've got three reasons to share here. One is the issue of elections that has been the bedrock of any nation. The government has extended the election for a cause of sport, a Pacific game, and they said that because we have the Pacific Games 2023, we need to move or extend the election to 2024. And that is one of the saddest things we have heard and learned of, because of the election is much more bigger, and it's a foundation of democracy to any country. And it's very sad to see that the government is extending the election for the course of games. And we would like to see the U.S. in any way possible to get this narrative to the Somaliland government that we need to have election before sports. This is one of the important things that should be happening in the country of Solomon Islands in terms of the democracy beliefs and the way CCP influenced the government to have the sport. Because we have seen, by the time they hand the infrastructure to the people of Solomon Island, it will going to be a huge thing. And people will see that this is China. This is how China do things much faster than the US. So they seems to think that election is something not important. So we are fighting for the election to be the most important thing to happen than sports. That's one. Secondly, the absence of the US, like we have seen, we have the belief in democracy. And the people keep asking, but where is US? Where is the United States? Because we have seen Chinese people here. We've seen noodles and all stuff of food that been imported from China. But the people back in the country still have the belief because of the relationship way back in 1942, where the Americans were held by militants who fought in the war. And when we see the parliamentary house in Solomon Islands, we think of US, because they are the one building the place, the parliamentary house. And now that the USH scale is there in Malita province, we think it's good for the US people to have a platform that connects with the Solomon Island people. It's a people to people, so that we can see effectively how things be happening, because we have been seeing these government-to-government issues and nothing happened. We are feeding a government that is not good for the people. So is there any way that we can have another different ways of aligning the helps from the United States to the people of Solomon Islands? That would be a good idea.
Now, I think it's very fortunate that you were able to make this trip to the U.S. I think you're here this week and next week as well, and you're able to tell some of your story to think tanks like us, to members of Congress. Are you fearful of what will happen when you return to the Solomon Islands? It does seem that the federal government and the current prime minister are very much at odds with your position, and with the support of the CCP and others have been targeting you. Are you fearful for your future?
Definitely. When I was back in the Solomon Island, we have seen this news in papers talking about putting Sweden in the front page of Solomon Star and Island Sun, that the sacred thing is now become known to people. Sweden is arranging a hit squad to kill Sogovare. And all those things, you know, give me a very big, like, I'm very fearful of these informations always in the front page of the Solomon Star News. So going back to the Solomon Islands is not easy. We believe they will try their very best to find ways to arrest us, both of us, because of the way we are here in the U.S. and with the medias that we have been now communicating and advocating our rights and the principles of democracy will something that CCP will not like to hear. So how much that we are here, when we go back, it will be much more difficult for us than we were in the Solomons, and the news that happen in newspapers are still not been heavy or been think of very strongly in the minds of politicians, those who want to keep the positions. But we are so frightened to go back, but we have no choice. We must go back to fight for the right for our people.
Have other countries in the region, have you noticed similar Chinese activities, either from a negative perspective, or have any other of your regional partners been helpful? I know Australia often has an influential role in the Pacific Islands. Have they, in this case, been helpful, or have they not been supporting your efforts?
From the creation office as a premier, what I've seen, the behavior of the partners that have been working closely with Solomon Island government, they always, seems to believe this bilateral thing between government to government. And in many cases, that really affects the people by pressing them down for standing for their right, because of, like, now we have the Chinese police advisors in the country, and they are, asking the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to order guns to look after the infrastructures. But it is so lucky that this news, exposed before doing it, so ending up the government don't allow it. Mm-hmm. But the issue of getting replica guns into the country and all these things, it's like aiding the countries that we have friends to, like aiding them to keep the people's voice down. At the moment, we hardly talk out, or you cannot speak for your right, because when you speak against the one China policy or things that the government wants, you will be arrested. Mm-hmm. So this is a very fearful situation back at home.
So most neighbors, Australia included, seem to be working with the federal government and supporting efforts to suppress your opposition in some ways to the one China policy. Basically, they've been engaging with the Prime Minister, but not with your province or you or other officials that are pushing back against China's presence. Is that right?
Yes, because what's actually the process at the moment is the other government, like in Australia, they cannot deal directly with the provincial government. So the only way for the Australian to deal with the people of Solomon is through the government-to-government procedures. So it would be very difficult, except on things like the NGOs, where they hardly have the good, organizing themselves in the provinces on how they've been doing things. So in terms of Australian helping the provinces, they must come to the national government. Mm-hmm. And very rarely you can see people from these bilateral friends coming to the provinces. Mm.
If it's okay with you, I would love to open up the discussion and maybe get some questions from the audience.
Yes.
Okay. That's a tradition we have here at Heritage. We like to keep it an interactive discussion. Looks like we already have a few. So maybe we'll go left to right. Is that right?
Yeah, g'day. G'day, Premier Lincoln Parker from Australia.
Uh-oh.
So it's sad to hear that it seems that the Australian government isn't supporting you, and considering that Solomon Islands is such a strategic country to the northeast of Australia, could certainly, if it fell into Chinese hands, cut off our sea lanes of communication and our trade. Considering that Australia seems only to be dealing with the Prime Minister Sogavare, and that you've recently been ousted from your position as Premier of Mailata, the largest province in the Solomon Islands, simply because you don't support the one China policy, which seems strange to me in a democracy, and also that in a democracy that they have postponed a federal election simply because of some sport. I'm wondering, and also lastly, I heard that you are in fear of being arrested when you get back from CCP coercion of the federal government. I'm wondering, is the Australian government doing anything at all to assist you, whether formally or informally, considering that you are one of the last Western allies we seem to have in the Solomons? What, if anything, are the Australians doing to help you?
Thank you. So far, in terms of the governance in Malaita, where going back to when I was the Premier, the help that has been given to us is to the national government through helps like medical treatments. But for me to get a help as a Premier from the government of Australia, or any time that we can talk, or they can call me in office that we can discuss issues relating to the belief we have, there's none.
Mm-hmm. More questions?
Hello, Gavin Su from the Atlantic Council, and I have a question regarding a previous comment you made about being afraid for your life. So I'm wondering how the Solomon Islands is working to combat Chinese disinformation. And Chinese disinformation does not necessarily have to come from places like Xinhua or the Chinese embassy. And as you mentioned before, there was it can also come from like disinformation within the Solomon Islands. And so, like you mentioned, for the Solomon Star, it was an article by a reporter called Alfred Sasako. And he claimed that you were behind a U.S.-backed plot conspiring to overthrow the government of the Prime Minister. And so this reporter, Alfred Sasako of the Solomon Star, also has connections to China. For example, he visited China before and sponsorship from the CCP, as well as CCP-aligned organizations. And so with this information environment with CCP-connected journalists working at these prominent newspapers, it seems like there's not much done in terms of protecting the information environment. And do you think this is a problem within like publications like the Solomon Star, or the federal government is related on this as well? Thank you.
Sasako is the editor of the Solomon Star. It's one of the main newspapers in the Solomon Islands. And he also has an affiliation with the CCP. So most of the informations, like we have seen, the way he wrote his news in the media is not neutral. So looking from now that he is with the MEDI, the new government of Malaita, who is advising Malaita Provincial new Premier, he is also get some advices from the national government, from the CCP, in working together to oust my government from being the Premier of the province. So yes, the newspaper Solomon Star has been, the Chinese people has been supporting this newspaper, giving them apparatus like laptops and computers, and we believe they've been involving much in that newspaper in the Solomon Islands. There are only two newspapers, and one is the one that Chinese CCP has been involved much in it.
Mm-hmm. Maybe a question over here.
Thank you. Two quick questions. One, we talked about Australia as a partner, but also what do you think about some of the other partners like Japan? How is Japan perceived on the ground? And the other question is, a lot of what you're describing happens through bribery, through illegal money. Is there a way maybe of tracking illegal money or something like that that would help? Would anti-corruption efforts be helpful in this process?
Thank you. Yes, the first question is about the Japan. Japan is the only country that involves many infrastructure, big ones like road and bridges and wharf, but they are very quiet. They're so quiet. So they're doing things in the country. They involve in community developments and even the main infrastructures of the country like the roads. But they are so very quiet. They're just doing things quietly. Yeah. And the other question is the money. Yes, this is something very difficult for a indigenous Solomon Islander to quickly get into it, getting how this money comes and how the members of parliament get involved in this corruption. But they did, because we have seen the way they switch, and also the extension of the parliament election. It's because the 39 members of these members have been paid with the Chinese slush fund. And 39 is 2/3 of the parliament of 50. And if you have 2/3 on your side, you can change the constitution.
So just so I heard that correct, you said 39 of the 50 members of the National Assembly are being paid from a Chinese slush fund?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. We have more. It's good. Lots of questions.
Dean Baxendale, China Democracy Fund. I've been following Daniel's case for some time now. One of the things that you mentioned about Sasako, he's also the vice president of the China Friendship Association of the Solomon Islands, which is a United Front operation. So we
just to clarify that again, the editor who is writing articles against you is a member of the China Friendship Association.
Yes.
Vice President. Vice President.
Okay.
So, which we know United Front, and these operations are but a microcosm as we see it playing out in the Solomon Islands. So for America and the world, watching what's happening in the Solomon Islands, and we know about the influence operations in Canada, the United States, and Britain, how do you see your battle to support Malaita and the people of the Solomon Islands playing out on a global stage? Because really this is, your democracy is at stake, our democracies are at stake. So how do you see it playing out for yourself in the future? And when you go back to the Solomon Islands, how do you hope to fight back again?
Thank you. That's a very good question. First, one of the very important things that we need to have is the election. Election is the first number one thing, putting the democratic principles back into order. That is one of the things that people in the whole Solomon Islands will see, that they still have the democratic rights, the rights that belongs to the people. The bedrock of any nation is the election. So if the world, those who we share the same principle, can have some kind of a narrative that goes back to the Solomon Islands about the election thing, that will help us so much. Another issue is the court cases that we have filed against the national government, because these cases are, in my view, is a test case for all of the Pacific region. Is for them to get hold on an elected member for not believing to one China policy, and you've been ousted or cancel your seat from being a member. And if we can prove that they lose the case, it's going to be a show for all of the Pacific nations and the Solomon Islands. And that in itself will give the people the direction and the thinking that we have seen with our own eyes, that these people are not telling the truth. Because the court case says so. They've lost the case. But unfortunately, and thank you for those who help in, like yourself, in funding the cases back at home. These cases, is very, very expensive for a local Solomon, indigenous Solomon Island to file in the High Court. These lawyers, the cost of the cases are very, very expensive. And they are pushing us to an avenue that we cannot foot it, like the court cases. Even if you got something to challenge in court, you will hardly do it because of the court cases are very expensive. So by winning the court cases and putting the election in order, and then working from people to people, the three main things I've seen will definitely quickly change the whole situation.
A virtual question from the audience submitted from Kimberly Reed. Here's her question. I served as the chairman of the Export-Import Bank of the United States during the Trump administration. National Security Advisor Ambassador Robert O'Brien and I hoped to visit the Solomon Islands in November 2021, but COVID presented some challenges. My export-import tenure ended in 2021. In 2022, news reports indicated that the Solomon Islands government has secured a $66 million loan from China to build 161 mobile communication towers, which will be built and supplied by Chinese telecom giant Huawei. The loan will come from the Export-Import Bank of China, which has offered a 1% interest rate. So, do you need a U.S. Export-Import Bank as part of a whole-of-government approach to help the Solomon Islands buy made-in-the-USA goods and services versus China?
And let me just add a follow-up, because briefly before we came in here, it sounded as if one of the first initiatives taken by the new Malaita premier, so you were ousted and a new one was brought in this year, and one of the first things he did was to bring in Huawei to build new towers. How can the U.S. government, to get to the original question, maybe help to counteract some of this activity, or at least provide Malaita with alternatives if they choose not to go that route?
I think because the reason for building the towers, when they come to the province, when I was still a premier, they said towers are helpful in terms of health, medical services. You can stay anywhere in the province, even in the highlands of the province, and you can still do operations like doctors will use this communication to get advice from doctors in Australia and anywhere in the world just to do operations. So they are using medical, communication skills to change the mind of the executive government. But I have seen during that time that this is like an excuse for them to bring in the towers. We have the telecom towers in the provinces. We have the B Mobile company towers in the provinces. And I was hoping that they upgrade the towers there, and then the services still will be going under the same service providers. But going back to the new government, that is the aim of the national government, to oust me so that they can put the new government that they easily control over. So now it happens. So they are getting the engineers from the Chinese engineer to go to the province and find out where the towers to be located when I was out from the premier. So that's their aim. And if the U.S. government can step in putting a communication that is much cheaper in the Solomon Islands, or maybe ways that can be cheap to get, because communication back in the Solomon is very expensive. And for the government to use China money to build towers and then rent it out to the telecommunication service providers, it would be add on to the price of the service for customers. So I blocked those 24 towers.
I see. We've got a few more in the audience, and I understand one more online.
Just one more question.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Time for one more question, period.
Thanks very much for your time. It's been really interesting listening to you. I wondered, what do you think China's end game is for the Solomon Islands? Is it ultimately to try and build a military facility there? What's the end game? And also, can I ask, what do you hear about other countries in the Pacific and the influence China has on them?
Good question. Actually, Kathy, Andrew, did you have a question as well? Maybe we could take two for one as a final.
Your Honor, we've seen other countries which are heavily in debt.
We got a mic for you.
Your Honor, we've seen other countries which are heavily in debt via the Belt and Road projects, how they've changed their constitutions at the behest of the PRC regime. For example, last year, Barbados changed its constitution and changed its ceremonial head of state. When do you see the same thing happening in the Solomon Islands at the behest of China?
Can you explain what is
Could you rephrase that, maybe?
So in other words, Barbados last year changed their head of state without a referendum and removed then Queen Elizabeth II as their head of state. How soon before King Charles III is removed as the head of state of the Solomon Islands at the behest of China?
Yeah. Well, let's take the first one first.
Okay. So,
what's China's long-term game plan? What's the end game? If China were to get everything it wanted, what would that look like in the Solomon Islands? What do you think is their end goal?
with the military thing, they've been tried once in the past with the SAM group company trying to get a base in Tulagi, where the British capital used to be before. But people start to, find out the background of that investment in Tulagi, that SAM group somehow belongs to the PLA. Mm-hmm. So, in my view, whatever way they try to get into the country by using so many different developments, what is in the back of their mind maybe sometimes happen. Maybe in military, I don't know, but we can see that the way they start putting in vehicles, riot vehicles and riot gears and trainings in the country, it seems to show us the beginning of things like that. So I've been seeing that if we don't have careful, we will end up like the Uyghurs. We have been to the Uyghurs community here, and the way they talked about how China come into their place is exactly the same as what is happening in the Solomon right now. So they talk about infrastructures, good things, win-win situations, and now they end up that way. So Solomon Islands, too, are now going in the same trend of, ways. The Chinese come in our country, now they start to adopt our culture. They go and give, sell money to the people in Mali, the province, as though this sell money giving is their culture. So I've seen that they're creeping in through our culture. And very shortly, if we are not careful about, they will be looking after the whole of Solomon Islands with the way they think they will gain their aims and objectives.
Your timing is perfect. We had a hard stop at 11:45, and I think we've frankly covered a lot of ground just in our short conversation. You've done a tremendous job educating us about what's happening in your country and in your province. It is absolutely vital for us to hear from you what's happening there, because unfortunately, the Pacific Islands have been, I think, a blind spot for the United States for too long. And so I want to thank the audience for coming out on a rainy day and attending in person. I want to thank you for making this trip and for bravely fighting for democratic principles in your country and for your people at great risk to yourself. And I think it's very admirable what you've done. I wish you luck in the rest of your journey here in Washington. I hope you're able to educate U.S. lawmakers and diplomats and other officials on what's taking place. And finally, a message to the U.S. government. The Solomon Islands government and the Chinese government will be watching what happens in the weeks and months ahead, and we'll be raising awareness about it. So thank you, Mr. Soudani.
Thank you as well.